tax experts as well for a quick comment as far as the GST bill and whether they feel hopeful today or not. Gentlemen, let me start by asking you, and let me start with the Deloitte view. What's your take? Do you feel hopeful today on the back of what you've heard from the Congress as well as the BJP?
Yeah, I think we are very, very hopeful that the GST bill will finally see the light of the day. And it seems very encouraging to hear that all points of view will be discussed and resolved. And GST is something which has been discussed for a long time now. And I think it's a reform whose time now has come.
It is a reform whose time has come. We've been waiting for over a decade now. But let me bring in Amit Kumar Sarkar, partner in direct tax at Grant Thornton as well. Mr. Kumar, thanks very much for joining us on CNBC-TV18. Let's start with the number one demand, and that is the rate itself. The Congress is demanding an 18% rate. The government has also veered away from the 25, 26, 27% kind of rates that the NIPFP had first put out. And the finance minister on CNBC-TV18 along with his officials has very categorically stated that a low and reasonable tax rate is the order of the day. 18% or perhaps even lower, would that really set the tone for the GST's successful rollout?
Well, that's the biggest demand really which India Inc. is also making. If you think about one of the fundamental promises of GST, it was to effectively bring down the indirect tax burden. GST is supposed to bring down cascading, but more importantly, GST is also supposed to bring down the median tax rate. Having said that, if you're looking at GST coming on board, and if you're looking at GST coming on board with 18%, the question that emerges is whether the government sources, their calculations respect 18% to be the applicable revenue neutral rate. A couple of days back, there was a bit of a news going around that maybe the range would be between 23 to 24%. I doubt.
No. Let me point that out to you. In fact, CNBC-TV18 has been reporting this for about a week and a half now, and we can say this with a fair degree of certainty that what we are given to understand from highly placed sources is that we could see a positive surprise on the rate, and it could be 18% if not lower.
Well, then that's the best news we can ever have right now. If you're talking about 18%, the fears of bringing in GST at a higher rate immediately goes away. Then what you have left is actually the technical structure of GST, which are the other demands of the Congress, the dispute resolution mechanism, the question of additional tax, and so on. But yes, I can take that comfort, relying upon your sources, that if GST is going to be at 18% or lower, that is significant good news.
Sachin Menon, let's look at the other demand that the Congress is making, which is put the rate into the constitutional amendment bill, because there must be a cap as far as the rate itself is concerned, because governments are prone to playing around and tinkering. Now, the Congress, the BJP or the government's argument is that that is a preposterous demand and you cannot actually include the rate into the bill, because if you need to change it for some exigency or the other, then you're required to go through the cumbersome process of Parliament. On that demand of the Congress party, where do you stand?
Well, I think this demand may not be even accepted by the contest governments in various states, because in practice, such a demand is actually taking out the power of deciding the rate or taxing powers of the state governments to the central government. That is one. And second thing is, as you rightly said, once it is put in the constitution, then any increase or reduction in the rate for that matter, again, you have to come back for getting a two-thirds majority to amend the constitution again. And after a long time, we have a government with three-fourths majority, which was not a normal scenario. And I don't expect that would happen in the future as well. So perhaps dilute the intensity or the justification of this demand. And if we require, we can agree that 18% would be the rate. And, time will tell that whether that 18% would be a revenue neutral rate, or is it going to reduce the revenue potential of the government. And should that be less, then later they can increase the rate. Because the GST Council, as per the Constitutional Amendment Bill, has the power to decide increase or reduce the rate for that matter. I mean, to recommend the reduction of the rate for that matter.
Yeah.
So maybe from my perspective, that perhaps could be a demand which is unrealistic.
Okay, that's a demand that's unrealistic. Sachin Menon, on one of the other crucial demands of the Congress party, that is do away with the 1% manufacturing tax. And there they've actually got support from corporate India as well, because just about everyone seems to believe that that is a legitimate demand because the 1% tax is inflationary. We understand that some quarters of the government also are amenable to a rethink as far as this particular issue is concerned, but states like Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, it may be difficult to try and push this through. The 1% manufacturing tax and its implications.
Well, this 1% tax is actually on interstate supply of goods. Now, this is, understandably, this is coming from those net exporting states who has a great stake in abolishing the CST. And therefore, this demand came up to say that for the next 2 years, this 1% on all interstate supplies should be allowed and should be a origin-based tax, and that should be retained by the manufacturing states without any provision for input credit. Now, let us look at this today's scenario. Today's scenario, almost about the total interstate supply of goods, only about 15% is sold interstate. And
Okay.
that 15% is at the rate of 2% CST, which is mostly it is sold. And today the demand is that you allow us to levy 1% on 100%, which means that whatever may be the CST revenue which the states are collecting, the next 2 years, that revenue is multiplied by 6.5 times. Because only 15% you are charging, now it is going to be 15 into 6.5, which is 100. So this is a huge revenue potential, and in that case, the central government need not compensate at all. Not a single paisa will go out of the pocket of central government to compensate deficit in collection. Come that may, this create a great inconvenience to the entire GST architecture, because this is
Right.
promoting the cascading impact. And therefore, and not only that, even an interstate work contract or an interstate, what do you call the job work scenarios, every time the goods going out and coming in, there will be 1% either side. And this is going to create havoc. This is one demand which I would definitely justify from the industry perspective, which Congress raised. It's
Okay.
a very valid point. And I'm sure that
Okay.
the whole of industry would support this demand.
Okay, and so you're saying that that is a legitimate demand as far as the Congress party is concerned. Mr. Mani, let me ask you this. We're still hopeful that it will go through in this session of Parliament, but then it will need to go through various state assemblies before it can finally be rolled out on the 1st of April 2016. Do you believe that the April 1, 2016 possibility is still real?
It would really be difficult for April 1, 2016 for GST to happen. And what I would like to say is that independent of the political processes that go with GST and the legislative processes that need to accompany all of those, trade and industry would need significant amount of time to get prepared for GST. Because GST is the largest reform, I would say not during the last decade, but it's the largest indirect tax reform that we have undertaken since independence. And sometime back when we were mentioning, in terms of whether the rate needs to be mentioned in the bill or not, one key aspect we need to bear in mind is none of the existing tax rates are mentioned in the Constitution. They are all part of the respective Finance Act of that particular year or levied by the state. So this is something which is very unique.
There is consensus. Yeah, I think on that issue there is consensus that that is not really a legitimate demand of the Congress party of trying to incorporate the rate itself into the Constitution bill. I think there the Congress party doesn't really find support. Continue, Mr. Mani.
Yeah, and therefore I would just emphasize the fact that GST is going to change a lot of things for trade and business. It is going to change the manner in which companies go about planning for their procurements, the manner in which companies go about their pricing, the manner in which the information technology system work in various companies. And therefore, trade and industry needs time to prepare for the most significant reforms since independence. And if you are looking at it towards the end of November, and even if the rules are made available in the public domain in December, 4 months is too short a period for trade and industry to prepare for it. They would need significantly much more time. because many of the actions that they need to take are not determined only by them. It depends on their vendors, it depends on their customers, it depends on their lawyers, it depends on the IT systems also.
You're absolutely right. So you're saying that the transition time is not going to be enough, and hence the possibility of an April 1, 2016 rollout, even if it makes it through the winter session of Parliament, is going to be a tough one. Gentlemen, hang in there. We are going to take a